Chapter 71. A Thin Layer. 1. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Sometimes, she was very thankful for her strong mental fortitude. It only took about 2 or 3 minutes for Chen Jingyao to calm down completely. The ripples in her heart gradually disappeared. Good. In order to effectively present a facade of calmness, she decided that she should treat Su Ran indifferently and professionally, just as a doctor should. Sit. She pointed to the chair opposite of her. Su Ran nodded and sat down after thanking her. Just then, Xiao Lu from the front desk entered with tea, and for a moment Chen Jingyao felt the deadlock she had imposed break ever so slightly. After putting the tea down, Xiao Lu left and quietly closed the door behind him. Su Ran. Dr. Chen, I came here for a consultation. I know. Chen Jingyao nodded, then she stood up and walked around the table to her side. Open your mouth, let me see. Despite the fact that they had only exchanged a few glances as strangers at Erguan, they communicated regularly on WeChat. This could be considered their first official meeting, and it was as a doctor and a patient. Listening to her concerns through the phone and text messages was obviously much less reliable than seeing her in person. Su Ran had deliberately chose a time close to the end of the workday to have her consultation. She was afraid she would be fooled into doing the procedure if she came any earlier. She once went to the gym with her friends and was tricked into paying some kind of membership fee. In the end, she only went to that gym again a handful of times and felt completely scammed. Pursing her lips, she thought to herself, I won't make the same mistake again. Aren't snaggleteeth cute? Why do you want to get rid of them? Chen Jingyao let go of Su Ran's chin and slowly withdrew her gaze. As soon as Chen Jingyao realized what she had said, she froze. Her ears turned red, and she quickly turned her face away. What happened to the professional attitude she said she was going to show? The upper part of Su Ran's teeth were slightly uneven, and the 2 protruding teeth on both sides were not particularly sharp. Chen Jingyao looked down and licked her lips unconsciously. A sense of shame slowly enveloped her, but she recovered from it quickly. Su Ran was slightly startled. She was also surprised by Chen Jingyao's remark. I don't think it's cute, she responded, blinking, and added after a pause, it's ugly. Chen Jingyao bit the inside of her cheek, feeling that she had really screwed up. The consultation ended after over half an hour. Su Ran was very satisfied with Chen Jingyao's advice after she got serious. She thought to herself that Ji Xiao was right to recommend her to Dr. Chen. The only problem was that the price was a little too high. She sighed and used her phone to look at the time. Then, she stood up. It's getting late. I will come back after I think about it some more, Dr. Chen. She was actually feeling very tempted right now. Okay. Chen Jingyao wondered if the girl was hesitating due to the unprofessional remark she made at the beginning. She smiled. If you decide to do it, remember to tell me in advance so I can make an appointment for you. The clinic was hell when it became busy, and it was truly painful to deal with when appointments were not properly made and lined up. She was speaking from past experience. Okay. See you then, Dr. Chen. After saying goodbye to Su Ran, Chen Jingyao heard her phone ring. She fished it out of her bag, looked at the caller ID, and answered with a short, hey. She watched as Su Ran left the clinic and disappeared, and only then did she relax against her chair. The air conditioning in the office was turned on and she hadn't done anything that would tire her body out, but for some reason, she was sweating profusely. The back of her white coat was already damp. She looked up at the ceiling and closed her eyes, then she counted to 10. Suddenly, she heard a loud noise outside her office. Chapter 72. A Thin Layer. 2. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Her eyes flew open, and she frowned slightly. She got up and walked outside without thinking. Her only intention was to see what had happened, but when she stepped out of her office, what she saw made her freeze. Yan Cheng had knocked into Su Ran. Su Ran looked very angry. Can't you look at the road when you walk? Yen Qing narrowed his eyes and raised his chin slightly, his face as expressionless as always. Weren't you the one who kept looking at her phone instead of paying attention to the road? Su Ran's phone had clattered to the ground, and thankfully, it wasn't broken. After witnessing this, Chen Jinyao remained silent, but her mood was extremely complicated. The gears of fates had moved again. In the original book, the third meeting of the two main leads was when the male lead accidentally knocked the female lead to the ground. The only difference was the location of this incident. This was the last straw. 8 o'clock in the evening, after eating out. Chen Jinyao frowned and stared at the increasing red numbers on the elevator panel. Her heart was already a mess. She tried to suppress it and act like nothing was wrong, but to no avail. Yen Cheng, who was standing next to her, looked down at her silently. He frowned. This bad feeling again. Chen Jinyao couldn't hide the emotions on her face at all. He could tell that there was something wrong again, and it was even worse than before. He squeezed her hand, bringing her attention to him. When she looked up, her gaze was blank. Her eyes were slightly red-rimmed, causing the man's heart to lurch. After thinking for a bit, he raised his hand and silently patted her head. He refrained from asking her what was wrong until the elevator stopped at their floor, and they were inside their apartment. Just as she bent down to take off her shoes, Yen Qing grabbed her arm and pulled her back. Her mind blanked as he pressed her against the door. He trapped her face between his hands and forced her to look at him, then he leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers. "What's wrong?" he asked softly, nuzzling the tip of her nose with his. In the dim entryway, his voice sounded unusually affectionate. "Did someone bully you at work?" The stunned Chen Jinyao responded instinctively, "I'm thinking about divorce." She regretted it as soon as the words left her lips. Their surroundings immediately plunged into silence. So silent that they could hear each other's breathing and heartbeat. Her body tensed. She could sense that his breathing had become heavier, and the aura around him had changed slightly. Gulping, she was contemplating whether she should try to salvage the situation when Yen Qing pulled her arms upward, pinning her wrists together in a forceful grip. His body pressed against hers, almost stealing away her breath. She squirmed and struggled. "Let go." "Let go of what?" The man's voice instantly turned cold. She calmed down and cleared her throat. "Let go of me." He narrowed his eyes dangerously. "No, Chen Jinyao." This stalemate continued for a few more minutes. Even though they were evenly matched, the close proximity was not good for her heart. The city lights outside the window were dim. The space inside their apartment felt like a small world of its own. After a long time, the man opened his mouth and broke the silence. His dark eyes were indistinguishable and his voice was hoarse, but when he spoke, it was with a harsh warning. "I'll give you one more chance." "Say that again." Chen Jinyao shrank back. The Yen Qing in front of her right now was less unreliable and arrogant and more solemn. He was like a cheetah ready to swallow his prey. Dunyi started to meow from somewhere in the apartment. Chen Jinyao turned her attention to the cat and didn't answer until the man's patience was exhausted. He sighed dejectedly, "Why are you doing this again?" It was evident from his tone that he was tired. After all, who wouldn't be after being subjected to another person's hypocrisy and unreasonable behavior for seemingly no reason? L.C., but she really didn't know how to tell him. Chapter 73. A Thin Layer, 3, you are listening at novelfull.audio. However, to her surprise, he proceeded to take the blame and responsibility himself. "Is it because I don't give you a sense of security?" Chen Jinyao was taken aback, and after a few seconds, she slowly shook her head. It wasn't his problem. It was hers. Yen Qing sighed, let go of her hands, and suddenly lifted her body. The sudden feeling of weightlessness startled her. She reflectively wound her arms around his neck and wrapped her legs tightly around his waist. He took off his shoes and carried her to the bedroom. Chen Jinniao buried her face in his chest, then after a while, she carefully turned her head and peered at his handsome but stormy face. Her gaze was hot. "I've always feel that you don't belong to me," she admitted, expressing what she felt without giving away what she couldn't say. Yan Qing walked steadily and spoke clearly. "Is your brain broken?" Chen Jinniao. The master bedroom door slammed loudly. Bright lights suddenly flooded the room as he flicked on the switch. She squeezed her eyes shut against the sudden stimulus and felt herself being thrown onto the soft bed. Immediately, she propped herself up by her elbows and opened her eyes, only to be greeted by the sight of Yan Qing taking off his black shirt, unceremoniously revealing his muscular abdomen, and then throwing the discarded clothing toward some random corner of the room. For a moment, she was blinded, and in that time, he appeared above her and pressed her down. He looked very angry, but it was closer to a hurt sense of anger than an accusatory. "After all this time, you still don't trust me." "That's not it. I just don't have confidence in myself." This was true. She felt that she could not beat the plot. The man leaned down and kissed her temples, and when he raised his head again, his expression was indecipherable. "Why not? You are fair and beautiful and have long legs. You should have enough confidence to capture me. You're the only one who's allowed to," he added. She felt a knot in her throat. In that instance, all of the tension in the room disappeared. Or maybe there was no tension in the first place. "There is no emotional basis for our relationship," she said after some thought. "There is now. Chen Jinniao, I like you a lot," he leaned in, interrupting whatever else she was going to say. She shifted her body, trying to move out from under him, but was caught within seconds. The man grabbed her waist and pulled her close. "We have a marriage certificate, and a marriage certificate means that I will be yours until I die, understand?" After a pause, he said quietly, "You pushed me into the called unknown, so you have to take responsibility." She nodded mutely. He poked her in the forehead. "I'll kill you if you dare to bring up divorce again." Soon, she recovered her usual expressionlessness. "That's a little harsh. Seeing that you're still able to talk back, I must have been too lenient to you." He gritted his teeth. The scene was harmonious. The anxiety in her heart suddenly disappeared. However, she was tempted to test his fondness for her. She wanted to feel another layer of security. "So," she said, "Yan Qing, let's get a divorce." "Heh." The man sneered. At that, she sensed danger. In the next moment, her hands were being pulled over her head and pinned down. Once again, Yan Cheng's peach blossom eyes were filled with anger. Leaning down, he bit and blew on her earlobes in a punishing manner. "In your dreams," he growled. What happened next came almost naturally. Their bodies were entangled together. Chen Jinyao's clothes came off easily with a single tug, revealing a delicious expanse of bare skin. Yan Qing sucked hard on her collarbone. Despite feeling like she was floating away, she managed to regain enough of her rationality to reach out for the bedside drawer. However, her hand was caught before she reached it. She panted, pushing the man away. "Condom. No, I'll tie you up with my child and save you from that delusional insecurity of yours." Chen Jinyao. Chapter 74. Dream 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The man pressed his lips together tightly. Still trapping her between his arms, he leaned back. In the silence, his gaze held something ambiguous and predatory. Of course, if his expression wasn't so hot and obvious about his intentions to impregnate her, his appearance would have been the epitome of a cheetah eyeing its prey. The bright light was replaced with a dim, yellow light. That would only treat the symptoms and not the root cause, Chen Jinyao gasped, wrapping her legs around his waist and arching her body. With one tug, her long skirt slid down to her knees. When his fingers touched her sensitive part, she hissed and took a deep breath, then bit her lip and glared at him. You have to treat the root cause first. If it's not cured, I might run away with the baby, you know. She stretched out her hand and patted his face in a half-joking way. Her words were truly infuriating. However, Yanqing didn't react and continued to look at her like he wanted to eat her alive. The most dangerous thing right now was the friction and the very thin layer of cloth separating them. His mind was clouded by his desires, and he could barely control his own body. Realizing this, Chen Jinhao withdrew her hand and grabbed his forearm, then she lowered her head and bit down. Small, reddish teeth marks appeared on his skin. Besides, you haven't quit smoking. After talking it out, although their relationship was still somewhat unstable, she was not opposed to bearing his child. However, that didn't mean they should get ahead of themselves and actually do it. What if it affects the health of our child? Yanqing couldn't refute that. Fortunately, he wasn't an unreasonable person. After thinking it through for a few moments, he readily agreed with her concerns. You're right. But despite saying this, and in a perfectly serious tone at that, he didn't move. Rather, he leaned in and kissed her lips, biting and sucking relentlessly on her tongue. When he let her go, he pressed his forehead against hers and stared at her so closely that she began to blush. His dark eyes felt like they could swallow her whole, not to mention a certain thing was growing larger and harder against her leg. Was the air conditioner even working? Why did her cheeks still feel so hot? The stimulation was impossible to defend against. Then how do you want to treat the root cause? He drawled. She was dumbfounded, then she turned her head away and stared blankly at the curtains. All of a sudden, her mind was filled with an onslaught of inappropriate thoughts. She blamed it on the moonlight streaming in from the window. Let's talk. Yanqing stopped moving and hovered above her quietly, as if preparing for an intermission. Talk about what? She replied instinctively. He grabbed her hand, intertwining their fingers together, and gently stroked her knuckles with his other hand. About love. There was a brief silence. Although his body was nowhere near calm, he controlled himself and analyzed. I thought about it carefully. You lack a sense of security. It's probably because our marriage was not based on love, he said seriously, hitting the truth with every sentence. Do you know what this means? This means that whenever you start to feel something for me, you panic and fall into some whirlpool of anxiety. Anxious about what? About whether or not your feelings would be returned, and if you would be hurt by it. Chen Jinhao gulped. See, I was right. His speculations were confirmed by her expression and silence. Let's make it clear tonight. I don't want this to happen again. She nodded. But are you sure you want to talk while we're like this? After saying that, she shifted in his lap, causing his eyes to darken. A powerful arm wrapped around her waist, locking her in place. He enveloped her like a mountain, determined not to be moved by the temptation, and controlled his expression. Emicham. I'm afraid you would cry. I'm afraid you would be so busy crying that you wouldn't be able to focus on what I'm saying. The underlying implications were obvious. She suppressed her embarrassment and rolled her eyes. After a while, they got back to business. Tisk, you're too prone to overthinking and hurting yourself. I should have nipped your worries in the bud when you were crying pitifully the first time. Crying pitifully, she protested. Weren't you? She couldn't refute him. You don't trust me. Do you remember how we reached a consensus before we got married? What kind of consensus was reached? Do you think that was just for show? After these 3 successive and pressuring questions were fired, the wildfire gradually burned over. Chen Jinhao blinked obediently, trying to extinguish the wildfire with her own power. Unfortunately, she was helpless. Chen Jinhao. Chapter 75. Dream, 2, you are listening at novelfull.audio. She tried to defend herself, but when she recalled what she had said when they entered the apartment earlier and thought about what she was preparing to say now, she couldn't bring herself to look at him. "I had a dream." The man frowned. "Dream?" "Yeah." She nodded, coughed, and whispered softly, "A dream about you living happily ever after with someone else." Yen Cheng. After about 2 seconds. "Chen Jinyao, is your brain actually broken?" He was looking at her like she was an idiot, and in response she placed her hand on her chest in an offended gesture. However, she was relieved. She reached out and pulled his head down toward her and kissed the corner of his mouth. "Answer honestly. Do you think I'm being unreasonable?" Truthfully, she knew that the answer was yes, but she still wanted to ask. She didn't blink as she stared into his dark eyes. "It's okay." There were no fluctuations in his gaze. He probably thought that she was just talking nonsense and didn't take it seriously. Smiling, he said, "You've just become more stupid, that's all. Can't even tell between your dreams and reality anymore." Suddenly, she wanted to kick him out of the bed. This was really a strange yet normal conversation. They seemed to have derailed from the original topic, but at the same time, they didn't. It was like an extension instead. Yen Cheng organized his thoughts and summarized their exchange. "You said that the process of us developing feelings for each other is moving too slow. And you feel insecure. Plus, your dream about me falling in love with someone else or whatever is more proof that our emotional foundation is too weak." Chen Jinyao's hands were roaming around his naked abdomen when he said this. She looked up as he continued, "Chen Jinyao, I think we should start from the beginning and do this love thing properly." After a moment of silence, he smirked. "It's still the same sentence. My wife is fair and beautiful with long legs and shouldn't ever doubt herself. Yen Cheng. I am charmed by how good-looking you are. Yen Cheng. Thus, I will now start officially pursuing you." Chen Jinyao was so surprised that she didn't know how to react. The chest felt tight, as if her heart had been caught by something and hung in midair, beating rapidly with each gentle puff of wind. The feeling of joy that followed made her a little dizzy. Crazy, she was going crazy. She never thought she would be overwhelmed by such honeyed words, and when he stared at her so intensely, she wanted to surrender immediately. Her thoughts started to wander. "Hey, I'm confessing to you right now," he grumbled. "Be serious." The first step to establishing a relationship was the confession. In fact, Chen Jinyao was not in a daze. She laughed suddenly, hearing the joy in her own voice. Ever since they started this relationship, she had been the one putting in the most effort. She'd believed that her initiative alone would be enough to drive their relationship, but now, as expected, it was different when both sides did it. "Hey, what are you doing?" he asked with a smile. Smiling back, she slowly changed the palm that was on his lap to a single, stroking finger. When she felt him shudder, she leaned in and blew in his ear. Then, her expression became serious. She glanced at a certain spot under the blanket and said, "Applauding your endurance." He raised his eyebrows, then after a while, he smirked. "Oh, you're impatient. Chen Jinyao." Although she didn't want to admit it, when the man's desire was hot and raging like this, as a woman, she couldn't help but feel empty and covetous. But expressing this was hard. It never occurred to her that Yen Cheng did this on purpose. He got out of the bed. Opening the bedside drawer, he took out a packet, tore it apart, and then, with sweat dripping down his forehead and back, he said, "I need to teach you a lesson for bringing up divorce like that and making me feel so bad." Chen Jinyao hugged the blanket. Don't play dumb." Despite saying that, he still explained. "It's about how you chose to suddenly step on the brakes when you could have just let nature run its course. Let me show you just how painful it is." She covered her face. "That's not a very appropriate metaphor." "Oh, no, it's very appropriate." He grabbed her hand. She bit her lip, feeling quite bad for him. Her gaze kept sweeping toward a certain part of the man, looking worried. When he noticed this, he grit his teeth and bent down, gathering her into his arms before lifting her off the bed. It wasn't exactly a princess hug, as she was clinging onto his body and repeatedly testing his patience by squirming around. "Let's take a bath," he said calmly. With this, the farce started by her insecurity finally reached a conclusion. Chapter 76. Dreams reveal the opposite as reality. 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. It was late. After opening up to each other, it was time for the couple to partake in intimate activities. In this case, treating each other politely and then in a familiar manner. The narrow frosted glass door was sealed and there was only a sprinkler in the bathroom that required one to stand up in order to use it. There were ambiguous noises ringing from within. The glass door wasn't shut tightly, so there was a crack and water splashed out a bit. It gradually flooded the floor. The warm water inside the shower caused the steam to vaporize within the air. In the sealed-off space, it created a foggy and cloudy natural barrier. At the same time, it blurred out two people intimately holding each other in the bathroom. The steam caused the glass to become foggy. Not long later, Chen Jinyao lifted her arms eagerly searching for support as her legs were trembling and she couldn't stand up still. Her hands instinctively reached for the closest frosted glass by the wall. But because Yan Cheng had suddenly thrust it hard behind her, Chen Jinyao's support on the wall slipped at the same time she bit her lower lips. Up until she felt strengthless and placed her hands down. Instead, she ended up wrapping her arms around the man's neck. There was an obvious fingerprint that dragged down on the frosted glass. It transformed into water droplets and slid down the glass, forming new pathways. This was Yan Cheng's bottom line. He couldn't endure it anymore and was about to explode. He seemed to be telling Chen Jinyao with his stamina that she didn't need to worry. She'd get what she wants. A long time after it ended, Yan Cheng was extremely spirited and energetic due to the satisfaction of lying in bed with Chen Jinyao. He was unable to sleep and kept on going about. Under the dim surroundings, Chen Jinyao could faintly make out the spirited gaze in his deep eyes. Whenever they finished passionate lovemaking, he always wanted to smoke. He reached for the cigarette box by the bedside and grabbed one cigarette out. His fingers lightly pinched the butt. He spun the lighter between his two fingers. After a few moments of consideration, he placed the cigarette back into the box. After that, he tossed it in the direction of the garbage can according to his memory. "Never mind. Let me give up on smoking first," he murmured lowly. Yu Qing couldn't control his month despite not smoking. He suddenly felt from the bottom of the heart the urge to talk about life. It was unclear what button within him was activated, but he wanted to chat non-stop. However, the words got stuck in his month. He snapped out of his trance before realizing that he had nothing to say. Ah! Had he knew, he should have just started preaching after their lovemaking. He almost couldn't hold it in himself back then. Yan Cheng looked down and his gaze flickered to his thigh. He silently whistled. Compared to Yan Cheng's unusual excitement, ever since their lovemaking, Chen Jinyao felt sleepy and drowsy. She basically just fell right asleep after her head touched the pillow. She hugged Yan Cheng, her breathing steady. Her warm breath sprinkled on Yan Cheng's bare chest. She was well-behaved and quiet in her sleep. But after detecting how warm it would be to hug him while sleeping, she opened her eyes in a daze. She murmured, "Hot," before closing her eyes. She pushed Yan Cheng away without hesitation or mercy. Then, she rolled over and rubbed her face against the blanket before continuing to sleep. Yan Cheng was bewildered, having been abandoned without any warning. During winter, she would always hug and cuddle him. Oh! Clearly, now that he had no value, she pushed him away without hesitation. Chapter 77. Dreams reveal the opposite as reality. 2. you are listening at novelfull.audio. Yen Qing narrowed his eyes, humping in dissatisfaction. After a while, he pursed his lips and rolled to one side. He lifted his arms, crossing and cushioning them behind his head. He glanced at the pitch-black ceiling and knitted his brows, thinking about an issue seriously. He said that they'd date enthusiastically and passionately, but where should he start? Tch. Chen Jinyao slept deeply tonight. It was unclear what was wrong with Yen Qing, but he decided to get up in the middle of the night. He made sure to keep quiet so as to not wake Chen Jinyao. Who knew that she was sound asleep to the point that she probably wouldn't even realize if a robber came in to steal things. When it was near morning, Chen Jinyao had a dream. The scenes in the dream were so realistic that it terrified her. It was the type of situation where although you knew it was a dream, if you pinch your thigh, you'd immediately feel the pain. Chen Jinyao was bewildered by how real it felt. There was a little bun by her legs and the child's eyes were clear as day. He blinked, his eyelashes flickering like a fan. He couldn't hide his feelings, covering his mouth and saying, "Great-grandmother, let me tell you a secret." Chen Jinyao was shocked by great-grandmother, unable to process this for a moment. The little bun exclaimed mysteriously, "Great-grandfather said." Before he could finish his words, a forceful voice rang by the door coupled along with the knocking of the cane against the floor serving as warning. "Yen Jia, try saying another word. Your great-grandfather won't help you hide your snacks anymore." The little bun whose name was Yen Jia immediately shut up. He wore a serious expression as to say, nothing was more important than snacks. "Sorry great-grandmother, I can't tell you the promise made between men unless you can give me more snacks." After that, he smacked his lips, acting clever. Right after, Chen Jinyao watched as a group of little buns walked out from behind the old Yen Qing. Each one of them yelled successively, "Little Six, you cheated." It looked as if they were going to drag Yen Jia, that traitor, out and bury him alive. Chen Jinyao stepped back and sucked in a cold breath. She felt suffocated. She felt this suffocating feeling more and more clearly, and then she was scared awake. It was May right now, so morning came earlier. The sunshine climbed through the window and shone on the room brightly through the curtains. Chen Jinyao gradually snapped out of her dazed expression. Her heart thumped rapidly, feeling startled still. Although this wasn't a nightmare, this. She pursed her lips, her expression a bit complicated. After a while, Chen Jinyao moved slightly over and her gaze landed on Yen Qing next to her. The man was active most of the night, and now he basically blacked out. She liked him more while he was sleeping than when he was wearing an arrogant expression. He had bags under his eyes, but it wasn't that visible. When his eyes were closed, his black eyelashes seemed much longer. Unconsciously, Chen Jinyao extended her hand and pinched his eyelashes with her index and middle finger. She didn't dare to tug on it too hard. As a result, she naturally woke Yen Qing up as expected. Chen Jinyao was speechless. "Tch, I dare you to move." Yen Qing lazily yawned. This sentence reminded her of her dream. Chen Jinyao immediately thought of that dream. She had finally calmed down and wore a pleasing expression when that diminished after hearing his words. She narrowed her eyes and then sighed. Yen Qing was extremely observant. He supported his head up with one hand and cut straight to the chase. "It's one thing that I don't get a morning kiss, but why are you giving me this expression?" Chapter 78. Dreams reveal the opposite as reality. 3. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chen Jinyao was stunned. "What expression? You're acting like you dreamed of me marrying someone else last night and that I lived happily and blissfully with them. You're acting like I'm being a scumbag," he exclaimed. After that, he faintly felt like something was off with his words. After a few seconds, he confirmed his mistake. But he didn't know how to explain himself. Sigh. It was already too late. Chen Jinhao nodded as if this did happen. I did have a dream. Yan Qing immediately regained his confidence. He said meaningfully, you need to be confident. Dreams are the opposite of reality. Chen Jinhao exclaimed, I dreamed of us growing old together and having lots of grandsons. She paused before lifting her sparkling and bright eyes, staring fixated at him. Then, she smiled and teased, oh, so dreams are the opposite from reality. I understand. Yan Qing couldn't process her way of thinking. What the heck does she know? After a while, he suddenly laughed and exclaimed, right, it's the opposite. Chen Jinhao blinked her eyes, confused. They must all be granddaughters wearing princess dresses. He exclaimed. Chen Jinhao was speechless, unable to retort. The closet was a bit messy. Chen Jinhao wrapped the blankets around her as she limped to the closet. When she opened the closet door trying to find a change of clothes, she saw that her clothes clearly had been moved before. She was a bit confused. But before she could criticize and scold Yan Qing, she heard him confess. Yan Qing leaned lazily against the corner. You slept bare last night. I was scared that I wouldn't be able to control myself, so I wanted to find a set of clothes to change you into. He said in a proper manner, not feeling as if he sounded a bit like a pervert. But then I gave up. I realized that I was stupid to change you into a set of new clothes. The corner of Chen Jinyao's lips twitched. In the next second, Yan Qing wore his slippers and walked over. His hair was a bird's nest. He reached over and ruffled Chen Jinyao's hair to give her the same hairstyle as him. He resisted the urge to laugh before bending down and saying in her ears, good morning, girlfriend. The beautiful weekend started from breakfast. Chen Jinyao was just scooping rice out right now. She was used to drinking congee in the morning because it helped with her appetite. Besides a dislike for sports, she made sure to keep a healthy routine in terms of her eating. Meow. Dunny circled around Yan Qing. He teased the cat for a while before preparing to enter the kitchen to help. During the process, he suddenly recalled something. He touched his chin, not forgetting to eye the little cat beside his feet. Ah, spring has already passed. Dunny hasn't gone through his breeding season yet. Chen Jinyao exclaimed without even lifting her eyes, I had him castrated. You knew to get him castrated. I almost forced myself to become an actor. Heh. Yan Qing lightly laughed. Then he looked at Dunny in pity. What a pity. He's a little eunuch. Be nice to me in the future. Look at your mother. You got fooled by her, yet you're still counting money for her. TCH, stupid. He lifted his feet and lightly kicked Dunny. He remained silent for a moment before he walked around Dunny and into the kitchen. He glanced at Chen Jinyao's silhouette for a while before walking over and standing to the side. Hey, do you want to add some dates? Chen Jinyao's eyelashes trembled. She glared at him and clenched her teeth. No, oh, in order to promise that he would try his best not to cause trouble, Yan Qing stepped back a bit. When he looked at Chen Jinyao, his gaze flickered. He said that he'd pursue her. As a man, he must keep his words. But how should he pursue her? No matter what he tried, he felt awkward. Yan Qing pursed his lips and lifted his hands to scratch his hair annoyedly. After a while, he made out, Wifey, you look really pretty when you're cooking. Chen Jinyao was speechless. The side dish for the congee today was called stir-fried goosebumps. Chapter 79. Future Blueprint, 1, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Weather was good every weekend. The configuration of the rooms in the residence faced the south, letting the air flow freely. The only sort of terrible thing is that in the afternoon, half of the living room would be occupied by sunshine. Chen Jinyao placed her feet on the edge of the coffee table and glanced at the sunshine coming from all directions. She knitted her brows lightly and then sighed heavily. It was okay for now. But when they hit midsummer, it'd be a huge thing to worry about. I'm going to visit Chayu around 2:30 p.m. Yen Qing walked out from the storage room and glanced at his alarm. He carried quite a few boxes of expensive and valuable cigarettes. He then tossed them on the dining table and exclaimed, "I'm giving all these top-notch cigarettes to him." Yen Qing already learned how to smoke when he was in school. He tried all sorts of cigarettes, and once he had a taste of it, it was difficult to stop. But right now, he was somewhat addicted. Although he wasn't too addicted, he had to smoke half a box of cigarettes every day at a fixated time. The different types of cigarettes that he placed in front of him were his favorite. Not only were they expensive, it was also difficult to buy. Yen Qing lazily looked down and his fingers slid over a corner of the cigarette box. He remained silent momentarily before snorting lowly. "He's lucky." Chen Jinyao lazily stretched and peered at him. "Why did you think about giving it to Chayu? Even if you want to give the cigarettes to someone, do you need to do it at this instant? You don't understand." Yen Qing swayed back and forth. He found a bag and placed these cigarette boxes within it. "I won't be smoking them in the future, but I have to admit that I don't have that much willpower to stop myself. Therefore, the best way is to keep it away from me." Hearing this, Chen Jinyao supported her chin with one hand in deep thought. Yen Qing is really going to give up smoking. His action seemed too much of a coincidence. Paired with what she said last night, Chen Jinyao unnaturally shifted her gaze and slightly looked down. Her eyelashes flickered and hid the sparkling glint in her eyes. People said that besides couples that already agreed on not having kids, everyone else would go with the flow or agreed upon having a child at a certain time. In some way, they will form an actual family bonded by blood. Different people would stand on different perspectives to consider an issue. They all have different thoughts. This was the reason why a multi-society could be facilitated. Like what Chen Jinyao said, she wasn't against forming a family. Therefore, when they coincidentally mentioned this matter last night, she didn't make her stance clear. After all, she and Yen Qing weren't getting any younger. Plus, they had been married for half a year or so. Even if they hadn't considered this issue before, the two families' parents would be giving them all sorts of hints. But she really didn't expect that Yen Qing had such a shocking stamina. Chen Jinyao narrowed her eyes and knocked the bowl containing loquat fruit. "You make it seem like I should be hurrying to get pregnant as well. You don't need to." Yen Qing exclaimed properly. He looked over and his brows relaxed. After pausing for a moment, he wore a serious expression and lifted his head, swearing an oath. He gulped and continued, "Before I completely get rid of my smoking addiction, we won't consider having a child yet." After moments of silence, he exclaimed, "This is going to be a considerably long journey." He drooped his shoulders, not seeming to feel any confidence. TCH. He was overly partial. At the very least, he wasn't confident in making this a quick journey. This was quite surprising. Chen Jinyao lifted her brows in interest. She wanted to reasonably remind him that his addiction would be affected by external factors. There was no need for him to panic and feel alone. Chapter 80. Future Blueprint 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. She ate a loquat fruit and chewed, puffing her cheeks. After she finished eating, she retorted smiling. "What if you can't give up smoking?" "That won't happen." The man refuted without thinking. "I'd do anything for my daughter, so don't mention giving up smoking." Chen Jinyao wanted to laugh but she held it in. She leaned back, exaggerating, widening her eyes and acting shocked. "Daughter." Yen Qing acted natural, but when he said daughter, there was an undeniable imposing manner. Even so, Chen Jinyao still retorted, "Why not a son?" Comparing the two, he furrowed his brows as if he couldn't really accept this answer. Chen Jinyao understood. She nodded and came up with the conclusion, "It seems like fathers like daughters more." "Right. Yan Qing didn't deny this. Daughters are more considerate. Chen Jinhao replied, that's what my daughter thinks too. My mother said that he was bursting with joy when he got 2 daughters. But right now, my mother is considering the issue of family inheritance. After all, Chen family has many businesses. Even if they weren't biased towards boys, this was an issue regarding inheritance. She and Chen Jinlin weren't interested in inheriting the family business. My mother wants Jinlin to get a husband. When Mother Chen mentioned this through the phone, her tone was determined. She also had high expectations for Junlin's partner. She suddenly mentioned this topic but she didn't plan on finishing it anytime soon. Yan Qing peered at the time and chose to sit by Chen Jinyao's side. He looked at her for several seconds before snatching the loquat fruit from her hands. He helped her peel the skin in seriousness. Let's not consider this right now. What's good about inheriting a clinic and their tea house? Chen Jinyao paused before thinking his words were reasonable. She kept quiet momentarily. Up until Yan Qing peeled the skin and brought it to her mouth. She bit on it and then spit out the pit. She then looked up and said, I want my daughter to have a big brother. But I think we can't control the gender of our child. Next, Yan Qing acted confused and bewildered. The conversation ended here. As Chen Jinyao urged him, saying, if you're going to give Chai Yu the cigarettes, then go do it now. Stop dilly-dallying. It's not like we can decide the gender of the child just by talking. Yan Qing got up. He murmured in a low voice, why do I need to go and deliver the goods to Chai Yu? He then acted as if he was going on a casual ride and asked, wifey, are you coming along? Chen Jinyao shook her head. I need to rest and recuperate. Yan Qing was confused. This is all your fault. She cut straight to the chase and complained. Cough. Hearing this, he awkwardly touched his nose. He shifted his gaze, his face red. I will pay more attention next time. Chen Jinyao lifted her brows but didn't say anything. Clearly, she didn't believe him from her expression. This wasn't something he could control either. Chai Yu worked with finances. He was a leader within the investment industry. He may seem playful and casual, but he made accurate judgment for investments. The majority of the time, the venture capital he made all earned him money. He almost never lost any. To make it more exaggerated, everyone knew about Chai Yu in the investment industry. Yan Qing truly wanted to give up on smoking and to give Chai Yu the cigarettes. But observing carefully, Yan Qing didn't have any good intention of going to visit Chai Yu. He wanted to invest and have Chai Yu manage that for him. That way, he just needed to worry about earning money. Yan Qing didn't plan on staying at Chai Yu's family for too long. After he mentioned his idea clearly, he prepared to leave. It was around 3 p.m. right now. Recalling Chen Jinyao's request, he needed to go to the supermarket and buy some groceries first before heading home. Chai Yu obviously agreed, but he was curious. He lifted his brows and asked shockingly, "Our tea house closed down?"